Welcome to September 21st, 2022. This is an Archives of Iowa Broadcasting Oral History. Our guest today is Marcia Lense of KWQC TV, Davenport, Iowa. KWQC TV6 News. Marcia, old habits die hard. I can't stop saying it. It still rolls off the tongue, right?
It's always been a mouthful, so you did a great job.
I mean, I had to practice that one. We could get into call letters and a discussion about things, but we won't. Let's start with you. Where are you from?
Originally, I was born in the Chicago area, but I grew up in Rockford, Illinois, and that's where I first started my career. I interned at a TV station in Rockford, and ended up my whole career in Iowa. Who knew? But being in a border community, it's great because, we both have to have our hearts in both states, Illinois and Iowa, and that's easy for me to do.
You went to Western Illinois, so stayed in that campus. Why become a Leatherneck?
Well, actually, my older sister went there, so that's what made me think of it. My intention was I graduated early out of high school, and it was just by accident. I just had all the credits that were necessary. And so for the second semester of my senior year, I was done, and my parents were like, "What are you going to do?" And I was like, "I'm just going to work." And they said, "Why don't you, take some college courses at the community college?" And it was the best advice they could ever give, because I was kind of on the fence about college. But once I took courses where I got to choose what I studied, and just the additional learning was just so exciting to me that I decided that I wanted to continue. And so I thought I would go to the University of Illinois, but then I'm suddenly a transfer student, and so that they weren't accepting transfer students at that time. And so I went to Western, and it was the best thing I ever could have done. It was a more manageable size campus. And I ended up, deciding my career there. I originally went to school with the intent of going into advertising. So I was a business major. Started running into a little bit of difficulty with some of the math requirements. So I moved into the journalism department and communications, no math required. Although I'm good in accounting. It was the logical math, that I feel is illogical. So started working in the communications department and decided I needed to get involved. And they had a student TV station there, and I decided to volunteer for it. And I assumed that I would just run a camera, but they posted auditions for anchoring their newscast. And since I had a background in high school in theater and orchestra and music, I wasn't afraid to step onto a stage and make a fool of myself. So I went ahead and auditioned, and I got the job. So I've been a news anchor since college. And when that happened, and I got more involved in reporting and anchoring, I just fell in love, and I'm still in love with it.
I need to make sure I mention our producer today is Cliff Brockman, and the three of us all worked in the Quad Cities at the same time, but overlapped at different places. But you were not in the Quad Cities first. Where was your first job at, Marcia?
Well, as I mentioned, my first job was an internship in Rockford, in my hometown. And then they actually paid me to come back during Christmas break after that summer internship. I was an associate producer there. First job after college was in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. It was a radio TV combination. So I actually started in radio and worked in a AM news department, and then moved into TV while I was there.
And do you remember much about the station and the jobs and the stories in Cedar Rapids at that time? What year was that?
Oh yeah, that was 1982. So for perspective, Governor Branstad was first elected into office. um, and I did a lot of reporting. Well, first of all, in radio, I was, anchoring their afternoon drive. So you get acquainted with a lot of the news of the day. You also hone your delivery because you're speaking so much, and you learn how to write for the ear. So it was really good training for me, especially since my training was in TV in college. It was a good way to kind of hone my skills. Then I moved into the morning anchor, which at that time they didn't have local morning TV shows. We just did 3 to 5 minute cut-ins during the morning. So I still went in at 2:30 in the morning and had to prepare all of these cut-ins that were part of Good Morning America. I was at KCRG, and ABC affiliate. And so after that shift, then I would go out and report. And so I did quite a bit of reporting at KCRG. And some of my favorite stories had to do with farming. I really was I loved harvest. It's just art to me, but also the lifestyle of farmers, how they're jack of all trade. They're so self-sufficient and stewards of the land, and they love the history of their farmland. And it's just a lifestyle that is really neat. So I always enjoyed doing those stories. Didn't always get to do them, and how they help each other is also another thing that I always thought was remarkable.
And you are at a time in 1982, 83, 84, we're warming up for farming to lose a little bit of that romance, and it gets to be economically challenged. I know you have a job transition in here at in some of those same years, but farming changed dramatically, and I would imagine so did Iowa, and then the Iowa-Illinois economy. I mean, you pulled back on that accounting background a little bit in understanding some of the economics that you had to report on now?
Oh, yeah. Well, Rockford is the fastener capital of the world. I don't, maybe the United States. And so very much heavily based on the auto industry. So I left there in the early 80s, coming out of a very severe recession and a lot of unemployment, and then moved to Iowa, where, yes, the farm crisis was about to hit. A lot of loans that were taken in the late 70s during the good times were starting to come due in the hard times. And there were some sad stories regarding farmers and suicides and, losing their farms to foreclosure. So it was a tough time.
Yeah.
And the transition from KCRG and Cedar Rapids, and then coming to the Quad Cities in the late 80s, was a time when the farm crisis had kind of this delayed reaction to a community that was heavily farm equipment based. And there were plant closures and many people losing their jobs, moving out of the area. So I never really thought about it this way, Paul, but maybe I was kind of the kiss of death. It seems like everywhere I went, it started to get negative. But we all went through a long period of tough economic times. And television stations went through those as well. When I started working at KCRG, they had actually just gotten off of a 37 work week. They asked all their employees, rather than laying them off, they asked them to take a shorter work week in order to save money, because advertising was down because of that initial recession that I mentioned. So, it followed me, but I've seen the good times and the bad times, and I always save for a rainy day.
I have to admit, Marcia, I don't think I've ever heard that a station asked the entire staff to cut like that. Do you know of other stations that were doing the same thing?
Well, what I saw was the difference between whether a station is owned by a private company or shareholders. And private companies they have a lot more flexibility in that regard. And unfortunately, shareholders, they want to see immediate results, and that option may not work for them. So, I've worked at stations with several different kinds of ownership scenarios, even a station that went through bankruptcy. So kind of seen it all. And I thought that was a great idea to do something like that. And then it's temporary, you still have your staff and you're able to hit the ground running as soon as times get better.
Was KCRG a community-minded station at the time when you were there? Do you recall it being immersed in that community of Cedar Rapids and Waterloo and Dubuque and Iowa City?
Yes, the kind of care mantra had not really hit yet in television stations. Things go in style, go out of style. Um, the one thing is that when I was there, they were a number 3 station, and they had a little bit of turnover in news directors and management. And then they brought in a team that was determined to turn things around. And it was actually a great opportunity to be part of that, to really be aggressive and really work hard in marketing and reaching your community to make sure that your viewers were going to watch you.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I left, they were number 2. So we had seen that progress. And then after I left, hopefully not because I left, they became number 1. The challenge with that market, as with many, is the geography. Trying to get up to Decorah, which was in the market. The 5 years I was there, I was never in Decorah covering a story. And then it went as far south as south of Iowa City, Washington, Iowa. So pretty vast market in a time that wasn't digital. You still had to put your tape together. A lot of times you were listening to it in the car as you're driving back to the station, and the things that you would see where they were running at the last minute to get that edited tape on the air really did happen. There were some close calls for sure.
Broadcast news was alive and well as that point. Were you working solo or reporter photographer combos?
For reporting,
when you were reporting there at KCRG, yes.
Yeah, when I was going out on stories, I had a photographer. We called them one-man bands. Now they're called MMJs. I like to say Swiss Army knife now, because everybody's expected to be, every tool that they can be. It wasn't really popular. One-man bands weren't really popular. Good photography was still revered. And so you had the luxury of a photographer. I knew how to edit my own stuff, but you had the luxury of a photographer. I did have a photographer though, who wasn't going to let me slip by and have easy street. I remember covering a protest, and back then you had a recording deck that was 35 pounds, and then you had a camera that was like 30 pounds. So he carried the camera and he gave me the recording deck as we were following these protesters downtown. And I can tell you that 35 pounds on your shoulder, after a while, you notice.
It was the weight training exercise program that you were getting paid to do at the time. Yeah. Why the transition to the Quad Cities?
My husband. I met him 5 weeks before he graduated from college. Then I had another semester. He took his first job in Chicago. And in broadcasting, if you want a job in Chicago, all you're going to be is maybe a coffee grunt. So I had to, we decided that we didn't want to compromise careers. So he worked on his, I worked on mine. We drove 5 hours to see each other back and forth. Went through a lot of cars over the years because we weren't able to work it out until 6 years later. But it was a move to try to just get closer to where he was and where he could work. And so it was a compromise.
It sounds very
coincidentally.
familiar, Marcia. That's the same story that we had.
Yeah.
But it was common, more common than I think some people realize with reporters or people in work in general. They might be apart for a little while and then they figure out a way to get together. Did you target Channel 6 as the place, or how'd that come?
Well, I actually had an interview and it didn't really go very well. I was a little assertive with the news director when I asked for details about the job. And when he couldn't answer those questions, I felt like, well, maybe this isn't for me. So put it on the back burner. And when it came time to get married, my husband and I decided, then boyfriend, decided we had to just set a date because things weren't working out career-wise and this was just getting to be too long. So we set a date, we got married, we still didn't have the jobs worked out. So after our wedding and honeymoon, we went back to our respective states and roommates. So we were not living together after we got married. So there was a little bit of pressure there. And so I sought a job at WQAD in Moline in the Quad Cities, and got the job. And that's when I met Cliff and worked for John Rich's. And it was a great station. Got to work with Hoda Kotb. She was there at the time. Made good friends. But that whole time that I was there, I was working in what they called the Iowa desk, which was a bureau in Iowa because it was an Illinois station. They wanted to make it look like they were covering Iowa and that Iowa was just as important. And every night when I would present my story, the news director from Channel 6 would call and say, what is it going to take for me to get you over here? So I guess because I'd started the conversation with him first, he wanted to finish it.
Well, that's what I wanted to clarify here. So yes, I knew you went to Channel 8 first for a job, but who was the interview with that was challenging? Was that at 6 or at 8?
That was at 6.
It was at 6. So they knew you. Was it the same news director then that kept calling? So did you have a laugh about that after you started working together about how that initial interaction was?
I mean, it made sense. He knew me and he could see now my work every night. And, I told him what it would take to get me to move over, and he produced it. And that was, I wanted to be a main anchor. So I became the noon and 6 p.m. anchor. It was the best thing I could have ever done. It was fortunate. I worked hard for it. And I guess I wasn't going to back down. So it all worked out.
Where was the WQAD Iowa desk located? What building?
It was in the Black Hawk Hotel.
Okay.
Downtown Davenport. It was where they had closed off an alley and turned it into an atrium. And it was all kind of windows from the hotel lobby to the atrium of the River Center, which is an arena. And so we called it the fishbowl because you had people walking by both sides of these windows and they could see what you were doing all day. And we had a camera there for live presentations to our stories. We had editing equipment there. So we had everything we needed. It was kind of lonely though. So a lot of times I would just drive over to Moline just, to visit with everybody.
Well, that to me today just seems, we're talking maybe 6 miles apart where the Blackhawk would have been in WQAD studio. So, to have a remote, of course, cost savings now, it's, you'd work out of your home more often now in post-pandemic than you ever would in a remote bureau.
Right.
You mentioned Hoda Kotb, John Rich's, who went on to go work at Alcoa there for a number of years. Cliff Brockman, our producer on this. Who was the news director and maybe a couple other people there at QAD at the time?
Well, John Rich's was the news director.
Oh, sorry. That's right. Yes, John was. And then other people that you recall?
Al Van Zee was the anchor. Funny story about Al is he was a smoker, not unusual at that time. But he would actually leave the set like during the either the sports cast or the weather cast and walk through the newsroom and light a cigarette and then walk on through, put it out, and then get back on the set before the weather cast or the sports cast was over. I was amazed by that.
Who was the news director at Channel 6?
It was Steve Tuttle, who was the one who hired me. And there have been many more since.
Mm-hmm. At what point you're married now, and you decide to start a family, and that kind of, you bridged some new trails. How did that, what's kind of the timeline there personally, if I may ask?
Sure. You have to keep in mind, and a lot of young people today don't recognize this. In the 70s, women were just being invited to the anchor desk. It had been a man's world prior to that. And it also was a commitment that if a woman was going to be good enough to co-anchor with a man, she wasn't going to be able to ask for any special circumstances. And so women were generally expected to kind of decide between career or family. The thinking was that you couldn't really do it both. Then in the 80s emerged the so-called supermom, and that was someone who could do it all. And maybe they did it with, a house husband or whatever nickname you want to call it. And so I never thought that I would be able to do this career and be able to have a family. And Channel 6 gave me enough support and encouragement and stability that I felt like I could. So I ended up being the first main anchor in the Quad Cities to actually be pregnant on the air. That was I was pregnant in '89. So, there were plenty of network women, Jane Pauley, for example, who had been pregnant while on TV. But this was something unique for a smaller market like ours. The biggest blessing of my career is the fact that I convinced myself that I could have family and career, because I'm still working, but I still feel my greatest accomplishment is family, and it's what has been the most rewarding and what I'm most proud of.
That grocery store commentary is common in television, local television. What did people say to you when you'd meet them in public or the grocery store when you were pregnant, when you were setting that trail? Do you remember any of those conversations?
I don't know if people actually approached me while I was expecting, but what really surprised me was the showering of gifts from complete strangers after that baby was born, after my oldest daughter was born. Homemade blankets. And I even had a woman send me a card with quarters taped in, like your grandma used to do. It was, I feel like the community almost felt like it was their grandchild or something, it was really, really sweet and unexpected.
And it might have been just a little bit before the TV6 Cares for You, but does it make a little bit of sense, and maybe why the station leaned into the community and the reaction that KWQC had with the community and the caring, and they appealed to that? Were you surprised that the station went that direction?
I wasn't surprised. They, like many stations, they kind of, tried out some different marketing brands. The Cares was very successful at Care in Minneapolis. And we had at the time a vice president of marketing at the station, and she was terrific in terms of taking that Cares idea and doing community outreach and set up many, many community programs. I think, though, that there was already some history that the station had in the community, starting with the Bix. Um, in the early 80s, the station started actually doing live coverage of this 7-mile race through River Bluffs in Davenport. During a Olympic boycott, some of the Olympic runners participated in it, and that really gave it a lot of attention. And so our station just jumped on and, you know, rented helicopters and all the equipment that networks use to try to cover a running race. It's no easy task, and
No.
they did a great job with that, and it brought the community together for, you know, something so exciting in, you know, a smaller community. So I think that the groundwork was kind of already there, and all it took was, you know, some effort to connect things and bring more people together. And of course, we really pushed. I know at one point, we had over 100 events that we promoted or participated in 1 year, community events. So we really lived up to that CARE brand.
Well, I seem to remember promotion after promotion. It's the heart walk, it's the Alzheimer's, it's the mental illness, it's the child this, it's the adult that, it's the do you think that is why the station for a long time cemented just a tremendous ratings advantage?
I think it was a combination of a lot of things. I think Steve Tuttle was a big picture guy. You know, he came from a big market in California. I don't know how he landed in the Quad Cities, but he was very good with the big picture, and he hired many of the main anchors and weather people that that were very successful, and were encouraged to stay. And there are still some people still today that Steve has hired that are still at my station. So the longevity is there. I don't think that was part of his plan. I think he was trying to build a team. And he also then wanted to try to cover the entire viewing area. So we took some shows on the road, and we went to different communities to make those people feel included. And so again, it's all kind of like stepping blocks where, you know, we just kind of kept building and building on these strengths and then making them stronger. So it was no single person. Like I said, we had marketing people and we had promotions people and everybody pulling together. And whenever we had a station event that the station was involved in, as you know, everybody in the building got involved. Everybody in the building rolled up their sleeves to participate and to help pull it off so that we could make it look as slick and organized as possible. You know, so we had salespeople and we had office workers that were all participating in whatever community project it might be. It might be the Quad City Air Show, where we set up tents and volunteered, or it might, you know, be a race, or it might be Toys for Tots, where we had people driving up and dropping off toys. The Women's Health and Lifestyle Fair that brought community members together for, you know, an event that was geared toward health and lifestyle and women specifically. So all of these things, you know, really helped strengthen what was slowly being built and then rapidly being advanced.
I loved my time at KWQC. The people were great. It was a big part of my life, you know. I mean, when you think about all those people that have come through there over the years, I mean, at what point, Marcia, were you tempted to say, you know, if I'm going to get to Chicago, we're going to probably have to move here? Or if I want to do, at what point did you push aside maybe those big market dreams that every TV reporter has at some point to realize this is a great station and a great community to be at?
I mean, kids had a lot to do with it. Our plan was to stay maybe 5 years and then move up to Milwaukee, so that we could be closer to my husband's family in Chicago. But once we had kids, and then we had a great babysitter, she was an older woman in our neighborhood whose kids were grown, and they became our second set of grandparents for my kids. There was no reason to rock the boat. And when you have support from your employer, they gave me no reason to want to leave. They let me do more things behind the scenes than what most stations would allow. And, not every anchor would want to do that, but I wanted to get involved behind the scenes. So I've always been an anchor and a producer. I wanted to produce special projects. I love research. So I would do special projects, we call them series during ratings periods, but I love doing that. They let me do a lot of things beyond anchoring a newscast, which was my main job. But because I was able to continue to have challenges, it kept my interest. And so it was the place to be, and great place to raise the kids. And the Quad Cities, it's kind of unique because of the 4 individual cities. So it's got a population of almost a Des Moines, but it's nothing like a Des Moines. Nothing against Des Moines. Love that place. But it's just a very, very family oriented. And so it was something that we just decided, you know what? Took us 6 years to get together. We're not going to mess this up now.
Well, and I'm sorry, I was listening to you the whole time. I thought I maybe had, I have an old glass block. That's an old glass block
from the
behind
old
the
set.
set. Yeah. But I was looking for the cookbook from the I think the 40th anniversary. You've kind of become the station's, for lack of a better term, official historian. I mean, you talk about the special projects that you were a part of, the history of the station, and talking about Captain Ernie, and you talk about all these other things. Where did the history, how did that all tie together that you cared so much about that?
Well, when we took on the Care brand, I started producing special programming. So a lot of it was public affairs. A lot of it was live audience. We would do programs to tackle issues, concerns, community projects. When the 50th anniversary was approaching, they asked me to be in charge of producing a program. It was a station-wide project, had lots of people helping out, lining up, many of the pioneers who, worked in 1950s at the station when they didn't have a lot of NBC programming. So they would just grab people and say, hey, let's do a show, loved their stories. So I got to interview, old weathercasters and talk about what they did with very little tools. Talking to, one of the first female directors who was a pioneer. And so put together a program sharing their stories and kind of, logging basically the history of the station. We turned it into an awards style kind of live event, inviting, people from the community as well as anybody who worked at the station in the past to come and participate. It turned out great, and I'm very proud that we have something in place, organized, that, excuse me, that is something that they can look at and see the history, because we're the worst about that. Journalists are always looking forward, always hitting deadline, and not always thinking about, oh, I better archive this, or I better save this, or someday we may want this. And so it's great that we have something like that. I feel like history is super important, even with my storytelling. I think viewers like to be able to reflect a little bit, whether it was a weather event or that they remember and you kind of look back and remind them, or whether it was just about technology or times have changed. Looking at history helps remind people of where they are today. And so I think it's really important. And so I'm glad that I kind of became the steward of the history department because of that project at the station. So I'm continuing to save things. And yes, I still go down to the basement where we have the card catalog to look up the old archive tape, and very few people know how to do that. So I will occasionally bring someone down and show them. case something happens to me. So,
Are the heating ducts still an issue for those that might be taller or above 2 feet tall?
well, I'm short, so I never had that problem. But yes, the
Yeah,
basement is still scary with
yeah,
lots of boiler equipment.
yeah. You mentioned the stewards of things, and you mentioned technology. When KWQC.com came along, I just took it for granted the station was streaming live newscasts, but that was ahead of its time. The station was doing that. But what was your involvement with the website, and what was the station's commitment to technology back when the internet started?
Um, the start of the internet, I have to tell my kids that we would watch when we wanted to download any information. Excuse me, I'm going to have to do a hard clear. Thank you. Where we would just sit there and watch the file of the paper go into a little animated folder, while we're trying to download information. Lot has changed since then. For a little background, I came to Channel 6 as noon and 6 p.m. anchor. And then in 94, 95, about 10 years later, I went to the 5 o'clock news and noon. And then we had a news director who came and decided she felt that the morning show was the growth area. And so she took the 5 p.m. team and moved all of us to the 5 a.m. slot. Which was very difficult at that time for me because I had a young family. And sleep was difficult because kids would get home from school and it was time for Girl Scouts and ball practice. And instead of me going to bed, I needed to ramp up and drive them all over the place for these activities. So it was pretty tough. So tough that after 2 years of it, I needed a way out. At that time, our marketing manager was in charge of posting stories from the news department onto our website. And I felt that the internet had progressed to the point where we needed to do more. We needed to have someone from the news department posting to our website more news. Mm-hmm. And so I proposed working on the website as that position. It came out that I would continue to do the noon news and become the webmaster. And it was a big challenge for me. I had to, talk to people in New York about the content management system, or CMS, and learn coding and learn how to speak geek. And it was a high learning curve for me. Because it was more than just posting stories, and it was a more complicated system than what we have today. I'm grateful for it. It pushed me into learning something that was completely new, and it was something that the station really needed. So it worked out great. I did that for many, many years, and in recent years, they've hired more managers and have kind of cut me loose. And I'm like, that's fine. I mean, I still post to the website every day. I still know how to do everything, but I don't really want to be in charge of it. So I relinquished my title gladly.
Well, let's discuss real quick about that transition from you carrying a 30-pound weight on your shoulder of the audio deck to something that weighs not even half a pound in your pocket that can put you live on the air. Has that technology change been good for television news and television stations?
There's a couple of answers to that. And one is that, the technology, things getting smaller and lighter and digital. You don't even have to leave your desk now. You could do everything from your desk. You can edit, you can download your video from the network, you can write your stories. It's so much so that I have to force myself every hour to just get up, and take my eyes off the screen and get some circulation in my legs. But overall, that technology is great. It's allowed us to do so many things. And the funny thing is, Paul, you'll remember we used to have a Christmas party where we would have bloopers from the whole year,
Mhm.
and then we would put a tape together and all laugh at it. We don't really have bloopers per se, nothing like we used to in the old days because of digital equipment and technology, that you just don't have the room for mistakes like that. And it's so easily fixed and quickly changed and erased and everything like that. The one thing that has developed, though, that I saw it coming and I really resisted was news stations putting their content on social media. Because what's happened is now viewers expect everything instantly, and they expect it now, and they aren't willing to wait to tune in to the 6 o'clock news, um, which is fine, except that everything is so lightning fast, and the expectation is that you can get all of your news on social media. And we know that that's not a 100% safe environment. And not everybody recognizes, where is a trusted news source. And so by blending and mixing in with all of that, I think that there are some real concerns about where the future goes in finding truth and in finding news. I think there's always going to be a place for broadcasters, but I continue to see, now we have streaming, and we're seeing networks that are seeing some viewership diminish because of streaming services. Cable companies are seeing, their clients diminish from it. So things are really, really changing. And I don't know where it all is going to land, but I have some concerns. I don't like seeing newspapers failing. I'm concerned about the Associated Press being hurt in all of this. There's winners and losers in all of this. But I just hope that ultimately the public getting the information they need to know that is not the group that gets hurt in all of this.
Well, and Marcia, I have to, admit, when I came to KWQC, I had barely more than 2 years of full-time experience. And I'm pretty sure I was looked at as, what the heck is Doug hiring this young guy for? Now you are putting college students on the air on a regular basis, in a station like yours, and Des Moines does the same thing. I know they do it in other markets in Iowa. How do you help train and quickly try to get those young reporters up to speed and season them to live up to some of those things you're talking about? What's trusted? What's vetted? Is that information solid? Is it first? Is it right?
I mean, I agree that we are getting a younger, more inexperienced group of people. The economy has changed, and people coming out of college are being plucked by bigger markets, for one, before ours, but also are finding, better jobs that isn't going to require them to work nights or weekends at, dirt wages.
Mm-hmm.
So it's changed, and it's hurt the pool, because it used to be that everybody wanted to be on TV and that they would be willing to do what they wanted to do for less pay and for lousy hours. And, that is certainly changing. Our station owner is trying to compete with that right now by raising wages, increasing benefits. They have to compete with the market the way it is right now. But on the other hand, the kids that are coming out of college right now are really well prepared. And at least the ones that, are coming in our door, and I know they've been vetted, but the ones that are coming in our door are very serious about what they're doing. And they're well prepared. Yes, they're a little green in some areas. We have twice daily meetings where we kind of go over the stories of the day and the things to look out for and the potential landmines and things like that. And every script is gone over by a senior employee for a reporter every day. That's standard operating procedure. So we should be able to catch those things before they hit air. But I am just amazed by this particular generation of young people. They're good kids. And, I feel like things are in good hands if I have to leave, and I think that things will carry on, at least at this moment in time.
Yeah. Well, and it's easier to be an influencer because at that age in college or high school, because you get free stuff if you've got a good platform, and you can be a big deal on the internet and not go into television news. So, I mean,
That is a correct point. I would say that is now that demand to be on TV, they can do it on their own.
Well, and maybe that's actually good for television news because it gets rid of some of those that were chasing celebrity and maybe didn't care so much about going to the city council and understanding TIF or
I would have
understanding
to agree. I would have to agree.
how a caucus. You're getting journalists now, not necessarily performers.
Yeah.
Before we get done here, Marcia, I need to ask, have there been memorable stories, events, the blooper tape? By the way, I still look at a lot. I have a lot of those blooper tapes. Ain't no sunshine when she's gone. Randy Middleton singing in the building. That was a
Yes.
great one. But are there memorable moments that you've had in your career, whether it's on air, in the field, run-ins at the station with people that are memorable for you?
There are so many, with when I do get out, and I don't get out as much as I used to, and so I don't encounter the public as much as I would like. I've always enjoyed people of all walks of life because I feel like they all have remarkable stories. And so I've always had this, natural inquisitiveness, and that's why I'm a journalist. And I love meeting people and hearing their stories. I love storytelling and trying to do it in an interesting way. There have been a few moments where I was caught by surprise in certain circumstances. Most of my encounters have been when I am out as like presidential campaigns. So, one example was I was interviewing Barbara Bush, and this was during the campaign where H.W. Bush was running for reelection. And I had to ask her about the topic at the time, and that was the controversy over Iran-Contra. Mm-hmm. And on camera, she jumped all over me, and she was a junkyard dog. And I was very taken aback. But when the camera turned off, she was as sweet as could be, was commenting on how beautiful my outfit was and just all this stuff. And so it was the first time that I was like, wow, she's good. Uh-huh. If I was going to be a presidential campaign, I would definitely want her on my side. So that was one encounter. Another encounter was I was covering Al Gore, who was campaigning for president, and he was in a small town in Iowa. And there were some school children that were sitting there. He was going to speak at courthouse steps. And some school children were there, and they all had a little piece of paper. And so I was asking the kids before he spoke what they had. And their assignment was, how many ain'ts and don't got nones did he say? And so I interviewed Al Gore after he spoke, and I told him, I'm like, do you realize that you're part of this school assignment? And told him that. And he was so charming. And he was like, well, I don't think I used any of those. So that was fun too. Let's see. There was a World War I vet who was being honored at an American Legion event that I covered. And when I went to interview him, I thought that he would talk about, a war story or something other than what he said. And that was, if I knew I was going to live this long, he was 99. If I knew I was going to live this long, I would have taken better care of myself. And those words just resonated with me. It was like, geez, yeah, I guess none of us think we're going to live to be 100, so we got one body, we better take care of it, Finally, I think that a lot of people don't realize midday, you get a lot of interruptions. There's presidential news conferences and special reports and things going on. And so I end up sitting out there watching it. It's kind of like watching C-SPAN, so I see the unedited version of whatever presidential news conference or whatever announcement was going on, good or bad. But the funniest one for me that I looked and I did not see it on the nightly news was when President Trump had a news conference, and it was one of his first ones, and he was complaining about the new rule that I believe the Obama administration put into place that was banning incandescent light bulbs. Because President Trump said, I look better with incandescent lights. I don't look good with the other ones. And it just cracked me up because I felt the same way. I was like, I want the old bulbs back too. But you never saw that on, the network coverage. So I felt very privileged that I was able to see that unedited news conference and get a chuckle out of something like that,
If you had $1 for every minute of newscast you lost because of events like that, you would have retired a long time ago.
Yeah, there's been a lot of them where, we've had interruptions, especially midday. But like I said, I stand by and watch because we never know when it's going to end and that I might have to resume. So, so I'm privy to a lot of unedited information, and I kind of appreciate that.
I think, Marcia,
Finally,
go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, a lot of people ask me about what was your most embarrassing moment for fun or humor. And of course, I'll never say my most embarrassing moment because, frankly, it's embarrassing. But there were a few things that happened. One, when I was doing the news when I had an infant and a 1-year-old. So my two youngest are 14 months apart. So I wasn't getting a lot of sleep at that time. And I was co-anchoring with two jokers, Mike Mickle and Eric Maitland. And so almost during every commercial break, they would crack jokes, and then I would be laughing so much that I'd be crying and I couldn't get control of it. So I had many newscasts during that time where people could not figure out why Marcia is laughing uncontrollably all the time.
Dear station management, why is Marcia laughing all of the time?
And then there was a time where Davy Jones of the Monkees had passed away. And I brought in my Monkees album that I got from my older sister to show to Teresa and talk about an interview that I had done with Davy Jones. And sadly, while I was talking to her, the album fell out of the sleeve and crashed on the floor and broke.
Oh my.
And it was like, Teresa's like, oh, and it was very sad and awkward, very awkward moment, right? So awkward that after the newscast, a viewer called me on the phone and said, hey, I have the same Monkees album. Do you want mine? Which I thought was the sweetest. You can watch it. It's on YouTube. Somebody scraped it from our newscast, and you can watch me drop the Monkees album on TV. So there's some embarrassing moments.
One night, Chris Hutzman and I think maybe Eric, we broke records on purpose on air because it had been a hot day and we broke another record. That's what we could do on Saturday nights when people weren't watching us, Marcia.
If you can find them now, right?
Yeah. I think when it's all said and done, one of the big pieces of the history that you will write about KWQC and Channel 6 is the amount of longevity in so many people there at the station on air and, to an extent behind the scenes. But I'm sitting here while you've been talking, I've been thinking about 4 women that have been at that station for more than 20 years. Yourself, Sharon DeReek, Paula Sands, and Teresa Bryant. I don't think another station in the country that can claim quite the longevity that you have all had and the influence that you've had on the station. Has that ever hit you about just how special it is to be working with so many people for so many years the same?
Well, I can't speak for them, but I think it's probably for the same reason, and it's that we all are doing what we love. We continue to have a passion for what we do. And, the station has gone through ups and downs. And as I mentioned before, has been supportive over the years. It probably isn't enough to keep you to do the same thing day in, day out for 35 years, or in Paula's case, 40 years. I've been in the business for 41 years, but not at the same station. I just think that, you know, it's the passion for what we do and the station letting us continue to do what we want to do. Um, I just love waking up every day and not knowing what my day is going to be like, and coming home every night being enriched because I had to learn about whatever the news of the day was. I had to learn more about that subject in order to report it. And that's what keeps me going. It's a huge responsibility too, and one that I know all of us that you mentioned take very seriously, because you know, we have been there for a long time. We have a reputation. Gosh, you can't go anywhere without, you know, somebody talking to you. But that happens even with the newbies. You know, after a couple of weeks of being on the air, they say, "Wow, people are recognizing me," and it speaks for the power of the station in our community and how much our community embraces the television station as kind of their home base. And I think that's why, with all of the technological changes that we've talked about, one of the things that we have kept to our hearts is that it's about local. And if this station is going to survive all of these changes, we need to be hyper local and give people what they can't get anywhere else, to be able to, you know, continue that strength and remain, you know, viable in the future.
Marcia Lense, thank you so very much for your time. It was so good to catch up and to hear these stories and to get them on I won't even say tape, on the digital space.
On video.
On video. All right, Marcia Lense, KWQC, Davenport, Iowa, on this oral history. Our producer today has been Cliff Brockman. I'm Paul Yeager. On this, the 21st day of September, 2022. Thank you so very much for watching here on the Archives of Iowa Broadcasting.
It's been a pleasure.